Yes, hello Mirador. Good morning. I'm flying solo for the next 20 minutes or so. At 10 o'clock, I'll be inviting Harry Atherton on from Normandy for a half an hour or so chat. And it may be that Keith, the anchorman, joins me once he's worked out the link. The subject I'd like to mention, I can't discuss it because there's nobody other than myself, but is domestic abuse and what victims can do and what they're entitled to do. The law is catching up with this situation, and let it be said that although the vast majority of victims of domestic abuse are females, there are also men being abused within relationships as well. And in fact, there are existing documentaries and another one coming up on the BBC shortly about the abuse of men by their partners. But something that struck me on the BBC News about 10 days ago was a mention of what's known as Clare's Law. Now, Clare's Law is formally known as the Domestic Violence Disclosure Scheme, and it was introduced in 2014 after a campaign by the father of a lady called Clare Wood. Clare Wood was murdered by her partner, George Appleton, in 2009. And brutally murdered. At the time, she had a daughter called Maddie, who is now an adult. The police at the time were told and told again about Appleton and his violence and his controlling and coercive behaviour, but nothing was done. When this all happened, it became apparent that he had previous convictions for violence against women and men, and also harassment. Because in 2009, the Protection from Harassment Act was in force to deal with situations whereby continuous courses of conduct that amounted to harassment were prosecuted, but nothing was done about Appleton. So Clare Wood's father, a chap called Mike Brown, campaigned hugely to make it a right for people to know whether or not their partner has convictions for violence or harassment. And as I say, in 2014, the Domestic Violence Disclosure Scheme came into force, colloquially known as Clare's Law. Now, what it involves is there are two aspects to Clare's Law, or the scheme. Firstly, there's a right to ask. So either the partner herself or himself, because it's gender neutral, man or woman, whatever the relationship, the right of those people or a concerned third party, like a parent or a neighbour or a friend, they can make an application to the police under the scheme to ask for the details of any relevant previous convictions. I say relevant convictions because we're talking about violence, a propensity, a tendency to be violent, or harassment. Hello, Keith.
Good morning, Philip. I managed to master it eventually.
Yes, well, what I'm mentioning to the public is what is known as Clare's law, which is the domestic violence disclosure scheme that was introduced in 2014 as a result of the campaigning of the father of a lady called Clare Wood, who was brutally murdered in 2009 by her abusive partner, George Appleton. Many complaints about him were made to the police. The police did nothing. And then it all came out that he had previous convictions for violence and harassment. And so the father of Clare Wood campaigned successfully for the introduction in 2014 of the scheme. Now, when she was murdered, she had an infant child called Maddie, who is now an adult. And Maddie came on the news about 10 days ago complaining that police forces were not doing what they should with this. That there are two elements to it. There's the right to ask. So a partner, male or female, or a third party, a parent, a friend, neighbour concerned, can ask the police for disclosure of that individual's previous convictions to do with violence or harassment. Not theft or burglary, but violence or harassment. Another aspect of it, which is where the police can be proactive, is called the right to know. That partner has the right to know from the police if they discover that the individual concerned has got those convictions. Now, you make an application, it should be answered within 28 days. Well, certain police forces, and this is what Maddie Wood was complaining about, go well beyond the 28 days. In some cases, she's discovered that it takes over a year, which is ridiculous, and many requests are simply declined. And there was no mention of any proactive work by the police to disclose themselves. Also, it was discovered that county forces were looking only on their database. So they weren't looking at the police national computer to give a nationwide view of the man's record if there was one. And two particular forces were exposed and admitted errors. Essex and Wiltshire were two particularly culpable forces. Now, the commissioner for this, Nicole Jacobs, said that, the scheme is there to protect victims to be. And obviously, police forces are missing the opportunities to do that because it's not that they're not taking it seriously, and it may be they've got so much on their plate that they just can't get round to it, but it's not being applied as it should, according to Maddie, the now adult daughter of the murdered Clare Wood. So I just thought I'd flag that up today.
Yes, I find it interesting, Philip, and I'd like your view from the legal side, because obviously some time ago, as a journalist, I worked with coppers. First of all, any policeman will tell you is he hates going to a domestic dispute. Because he walks in and here is a husband and wife or a man and woman beating the hell out of each other. And the moment the couple walks in, they both turn on him. And so it's the last thing that he really likes to enter into. The second thing is that quite often a lady who has been abused will complain and then withdraw the complaint because he's promised not to do it again, and she believes him. How is that taken into account?
The scheme is for actual convictions, so it's a rather remote scheme. It doesn't involve either of the situations you've raised, both of which are absolutely accurate. I mean, I can remember as a very junior barrister going to county courts where generally a woman had summoned her violent partner, male, to court to get an injunction. And then literally at the court door, I'm there and she said, actually, I've forgiven him. He said he won't do it again. So I've actually experienced as a barrister your second example. But this scheme does not involve visits by police officers. It's an application by anybody, even an off-duty police officer, to the relevant police force to inquire whether and find out if a particular individual has got relevant previous convictions or relevant criminal records. So it's dealing with the end of the process. There'll be no record of whether he's ever been summoned to court and it's been dropped. You won't get that. You don't get that on the police national printouts, I can assure you. You just don't get that. So it's a very different scenario. And let me stress again, this is gender neutral. There's a documentary coming up on the BBC shortly, and there are already existing ones on Channel 5, for example, of men being abused in a relationship, either by a female or a male partner, because again, it's irrespective of sexuality, this scheme. But, you know, many men are abused within a relationship. So if it were to work properly, it would be great. There may be areas where it is working. But given that there should be a response either way within 28 days, and there are examples of over a year, you know, in 28 days somebody could be killed, but over a year, that's a lot of time for an abusive relationship to flourish.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, this lady is calling for action, and that action has identified police forces which are not applying the tools that they've got. But Philip, you deal with the police all the time. Does it take this sort of complaint and effort to get them to act, or are there other ways of making them act?
No, there are no other ways. You can bombard them with letters, but that's not the point. There's no sanction there. The sanction, which has happened with Essex and Wiltshire, is that the commissioner finally acts and orders an investigation, and in the end, those two police forces have admitted faults. They've admitted it. It doesn't mean it's just them. It probably isn't just them. But I also have to stress that it's only relevant criminal convictions that are to be disclosed. So a bloke could have a whole string of thefts, burglaries, whatever. But none of that would be relevant.
Yeah. You are much closer to this now than I am. Do you see how any improvement can be made?
Yes, that it may already exist, but I think each police force should have a domestic violence team. Every police force.
Do any police forces have it?
I don't think they do. I don't think they do. They'll just they regard it as just a usual complaint. I mean, in your standard criminal case, you have what's called a disclosure officer. And that disclosure officer is a police officer who is entirely responsible for disclosure of unused material, relevant material, throughout the investigation and prosecution of that case. I don't believe this scheme has such a thing, because you're dealing about disclosure of previous convictions to try and prevent abuse. So it's a proactive thing. And to me, that makes it all the more credible and necessary to have a specific department or arm of the police force to deal with this.
Why isn't this happening, do you think?
It could be a variety of reasons. The worst one could be there's a culture that they don't take this seriously enough. I don't dwell on that. I hope that's not the case. I mean, the law has caught up. There's the Protection from Harassment Act. There's now the offence of coercive and controlling behaviour that is prosecutable. So there's plenty of ammunition, plenty of tools of the trade, but this is proactive. This is a pre-strike, anticipatory, so that people know who they are dealing with. Now, I'm just going to invite Harry on. I'll have to disappear for a minute, Keith.
Yes, indeed. I was going to say, isn't it time to invite Harry?
Yeah.
In fact,
okay, well, that's invited him. Are you going to stay on?
just for a minute or two. Yes.
Well, I'm sure he'll be pleased to see you.
Yes. And I'm delighted that you and he get along well together, because, as you know, I'm very keen to have good pairings. It's when Mirador does really good stuff.
Oh, Harry's brilliant. He's very likable, but he's also a very intelligent man.
Absolutely.
Very switched on. Anyway, before he joins us, I thought I'd just flag that up, that DVDS.
I mean, I think it's a very, very good issue. And the thing that has always amazed me is the way that people who are violent, whether it's men or women, to their partner, seem to manage to hide it until well into the relationship, and then suddenly it bursts out. It doesn't seem that well, men or women see any signs of it until they've committed themselves to each other. Then woof.
Well, it's it's human nature. It's Victorian stuff. It's usually the man behaves impeccably for a while, and then once he's got his way, he turns native. Anyway, Harry's here. I'll invite him on.
Can you see me?
Yes, Harry. Hello.
Hello there. Good show. I can see both of you.
Yes. Good morning, Harry.
Good morning, Keith.
I'm going to leave you mostly with Philip this morning.
Yeah.
But Philip, if I may, I just have a slightly domestic issue to raise with Harry.
Okay.
I've been on with he and I formed a rugby club 60 years ago in Vancouver, and we stay in touch with them. And the president's secretary was on with me on the weekend and asked me. He said that in 1980s, the club was left some shares in something called bacchanalia, which is rather a nice word. And if I knew anything about it, and it is totally new to me, but I said I would be talking to you today, and I would ask you the question. Does that ring a bell?
It rings a very slight bell. Some shares in bacchanalia, even the figure 25 comes to mind. But what bacchanalia was, I'm not sure. It would obviously be some sort of an investment, and I strongly suspect it was could have been some sort of support from one of the breweries. Now, I think we did get help at one stage from Molson's. After all, our rugby players were their finest clients at the time. So it's possible that there was some sort of a link with Molson's brewery. I'm just letting my thoughts wander here. You know,
Yes.
bacchanalia is the clue, but that's about as far as I can go off the top of my
Right.
head.
Well,
But I
I will.
do recall the name, and I do recall the
Right.
investment, and the figure 25 shares, I think, comes to mind. Yeah.
I'll report back on that. I do recall you and I going to Carling's for the very first shirt sponsorship.
Well, it could have been Carling's then, and not Molson's. But
Well,
I think we worked a lot more with Molson's towards the end. We would. For the weekend games, we would. The most important thing was not finding a referee or a pitch, but to ensure that we had a supply of moleskins, as we call them, for consumption before, during, and after the game.
I will leave you now to chat to Philip. Just one thing that you might want to discuss at some stage is William Hague was, and I raised this in my first hour today. William Hague wrote in the Times last week and was bemoaning the fact that regional media had shrunk alarmingly, where he sees it as a threat to the democratic process. You might want to raise that at some stage between the two of you. I've sort of lectured, as it were, on my programs, and I am alarmed, at the fact that we are losing media at a great rate of knots, and that we are a bit of a beacon standing out in a declining industry, but two, how serious the loss of local media is to our freedoms. I leave you with that thought.
Well, there's a lot to be said about that, because the decline of print media, the electronic revolution has been such that kids don't read newspapers anymore. They just pick up everything on their iPhones. It's changed everything. Now, local media, we're talking about, I guess, community radio, television stations, as well as small local newspapers. And so yeah, it's a broad subject, but I think it's also related to the way people get information generally. Whether very few people read for leisure anymore. I think I haven't got the figures exactly in front of me, but it's something like 1 hour's reading a week, I think, as opposed to 4 hours television a day. That kind of thing.
Yeah. Okay, I shall leave you with Philip, who.
Well, you don't have to go.
Well, I'll sit on the sidelines for a minute or two.
Because Harry is getting over a cold. He's had a bad cold for the last few days, and I can still hear him coughing.
Mm-hmm.
So he may not feel up to it.
Oh no, I'm fine. It's just simply I've got the cough that comes back. It's not the cough that carries you off; it's the coffin they carry you off in.
Just another point, Harry. Your favourite man has just arrived.
Oh,
Declan has entered the pub.
Declan.
And indeed is responsible for us to be able to get back to some sort of semblance of decent technology. He's coming to say hello to you.
Hello, Declan. As I've said before, one of my life's great and final ambitions is to meet Declan across the bar with one of his pints in my hand. By golly, I look forward to that. And that's going to happen, believe you me. I
look forward to it.
Going to make it over. Yeah, sure.
Has everything gone all right this morning?
Absolutely. Brilliantly. In fact, these two are going to have a nice chat now about the state of British society.
That's a long chat then.
Keith is going to remain with us because on the odd occasion he may be able to say something intelligent, which will
Harry, don't hold your breath, Harry. As you implied, it's a rare moment.
Good to see you, Declan.
I mean, on the reading versus television point, I couldn't agree with you more. It's not any kids who don't read newspapers anymore, it's so-called adults.
I agree.
I am one of them. I haven't bought a newspaper. It's a treat to have one once in a while, but I get all my news from the websites. Whether I use my mobile phone or this iPad I'm on now. I very rarely buy a newspaper. So I am a contributor to the decline, I suspect, which I agree is a great shame. Mind you, round here, you can't get newspapers delivered. You have to go into town to buy them. I know that doesn't sound much, but, an ability to deliver newspapers will be helpful. Do you get a newspaper, Harry?
Do I get one?
Yes.
Not delivered. No, I in fact buy 2 local newspapers. One a daily newspaper in France, which is quite well done, and a weekly newspaper, which really is quite old-fashioned, but it's extremely well done. And it's obviously based on community news. It leaves major national news to the bigger outlets, but it does form a bond for the people of my little town. My town is about 4,000 population, and they produce about 8,000 copies every week. It's a weekly newspaper, and for an area which extends about 30 miles all the way around, going to smaller towns and villages and outlying farms. And it's extremely well read, well supported. There's lots of local advertising in it. It's a successful little business enterprise. Well, it's part of a bigger chain now, and bought up, but I see no signs of that weakening. So there is still a tendency. And of course, what we do benefit from here is, in terms of readership, is an aging population who tend to go back to traditional ways of obtaining their news. So yeah, the newspaper business, it would seem to me, and the print newspaper business in France is in quite good shape. So I am aware that since both Keith and I were members of this profession for many years, there is a tendency now for many of the major print outlets to go online. I read 2 or 3 newspapers online. I don't subscribe to all of them, but I managed to squiddle my way through the mess. And I subscribe to one. I might as well name it. It's the Daily Telegraph, and which I read faithfully on a daily basis, but I read it online. So when you consider that many of these London-based newspapers used to have the tabloids used to have 3 or 4, 5 editions a day. Can you imagine the amount of newsprint that was being used to supply that? Whereas now, I guess there's 1 edition at best, and a much more limited press run as they too go.
Well, when I was training for the bar,
Mm-hmm.
and then became a barrister, I was based in the Temple, so as you know, very near Fleet Street. And I remember there was the Evening Standard and the Evening News,
Mm-hmm.
and there were at least 2 editions a day, at least.
Right, yeah.
Now, the one newspaper I used to buy here in Blighty was what was called the West Sussex Gazette,
Mm-hmm.
which was based in my town, Arundel. That's now gone out of business completely. It moved to Chichester in the hope of surviving and, in fact, regrowing, and it just died a death. So that
was that a daily or a weekly? Was that a daily or a weekly?
It was a weekly.
Weekly, yeah. Okay. Mm-hmm.
And it was very local. It was about West Sussex, mainly Chichester, Arundel, Littlehampton, Bognor, Crawley, and it just disappeared, I'm afraid. Now, the ones you read are the daily one and the weekly one. Are they both entirely local?
Yes. Well, the daily one covers a whole region. It comes out in about 9 or 10 editions, and each edition tailored to a particular region. So probably the total distribution area covers about 1/5 of France. The whole western side of France, going down as far as I would think to La Rochelle, and up as far as not quite as far as Calais, but there are 7 or 9 or so different editions which are tailored. They've got probably common interior pages, but then other regional pages which are specially designed for the audience that they're designed to reach. But it's basically the same layout, the same newspaper, and rolling off the same presses, and I imagine at the same time. So
for your region, what? So the issue you read,
yeah, it's a
Normandy. Which region?
A Normandy issue.
It is the Normandy. Yeah.
Normandy issue. Yeah, it'll cover Normandy news. Yeah. So it will have a local bias in that sense. Which raises a very interesting question. One is the importance of the immediacy of news to certain people, and the other one is the intimacy of it. There still is in France, and I think it must exist in Britain, a sense of belonging to a local community, which is particularly pronounced in France, where you've got 2 distinct demographic groupings, one of the people in the cities and the one in the countries.
Yeah.
And the 2 are at war with each other, not physically at war, but emotionally and mentally. There's a great, enormous antipathy towards them. There is a disdain for the national government based on the fact that it's all these posh people from Paris, as it were, and the local people with good common sense, farm-like common sense, are excluded from national decisions, and so they group together and they live a little bit in the past, and but they live separately to the major urban centres. And the major urban centres, of course, are now not very French at all. Um,
No.
so you're getting in the countryside, you're getting the French that has disappeared elsewhere. It's gone in the big cities. It's very difficult to imagine. Well, take London. It's imagine living in the capital of Britain. If you live in London now, in many ways. But in the countryside, you still get the distinct feeling of a pride of being French and being pride in local activities. So
Yes, well, I mean, I recollect when I worked in France doing the vendage for 3 years. The civic pride was noticeable.
absolutely, yeah.
Everywhere had a mayor, and so on. And ironically, even then, back in 1980, the owners of the two chateaux I worked for and their managers, working class people, you know, they were moaning then about the Parisians
Mhm.
and the central government. So that's 40 odd years ago.
Yeah. Mhm.
And it's got worse since, I imagine, because it's even more urbanized.
Mhm.
I mean, even now you can get a perfectly doable, uppable property in rural France for a song.
Yes.
And that's been the case for decades. Because there has been a drainage of people, no doubt work related, to the big cities, is my understanding.
That's one factor. That takes us into another subject, and that's to do with house prices in France. The largest single influence on house prices in France is that the old housing stock, the kind of lovely old cottages that you and I would go for, and that British
Yeah.
people generally would just dream about, chocolate box cottages, do not interest the French. They are still in the 1950s mode of the slick American pavilion type of a house. And they'd pay a lot more for that than a lovely old cottage, which on top of that, they feel that the old cottage has got to be modernized, brought up to speed. So there's a lot of technical work to do: plumbing, electricity, heating, what have you. Maybe the roof needs fixing. And so they're not inclined to go for that. And the other factor, too, that influences the price of housing in France is, believe it or not, are inheritance laws.
Yeah. Yeah.
Inheritance laws. Now, this is getting into your field of play, of work. In France, you cannot disinherit your children. They
No, I knew that.
automatically have to get 3/4 of your estate. Even your wife is left with 1/4 unless you form a matrimonial agreement separate to your marriage agreement during your marriage, whereby that she will have the usufruit of your means until her death. But then at that point, it all goes to the children. So you can't disinherit your children, even if one of them tries to kill you. You can't disinherit him or her.
How very French.
So the result is that when somebody dies, and let's say the old family home is to be sold, already the kids have half grown up or mostly grown up by that time because people live longer, and they've got their own homes, and they this isn't usually one of them who's prepared to buy out the other kids in the family. Remember, sometimes fairly large families, Catholic families, there could be 3, 4, 5, 6 children, to buy out all the others, simply to preserve the old home that the family grew up in, when they already have their own home and maybe don't even have the means to do it. But if one of them has made a few quid or a few shekels in the meantime, then the other children, who maybe have been less fortunate financially, will have inflated ideas of the value of the old family home, and they will not come to an agreement, and the house will sit there empty and decay. And so the result is that you finally get some smart English cookie comes in and says, gee whiz, that's the chocolate box cottage I've always wanted. I can pick it up for 30,000 quid.
Yeah.
Well, and he does. And being a little bit of a handyman and the English like fixer-uppers, he does it, and he's suddenly got a house worth £150,000. So there's tremendous housing opportunities for the right-minded people in coming to France. But there's another pitfall, mind you. They think, isn't that wonderful? We just come and fix it up, and they spend the time doing that. But at the same time, when they're finished, what do? It's like living on the moon. They don't have anybody to talk to.
No.
The French people are there, yes, but they in the meantime, they haven't learned French. About 1 in 100 people coming to France ends up learning passable French. I mean, it's amazing. They live in isolation, so they hang together in different in sort of English ghettos, and they never effectively live in France. They get a nice home much more cheaply than they would in Britain, but they don't really have the broader experience of having experienced a foreign country.
No, well, I can cite you 2 examples of that within my friendship group. One is a couple who originate from Falkirk in Scotland, and you'll know the name of this. They bought a chateau in mid-France and moved there, and they did a deal. French law stipulates you can split it. Yeah, it was like hire purchase in the sense that the lady who owned the place still lived there, and my friends lived there as well in a separate part. But there was a name for it in French. It's like a sharing arrangement, but if and when she died, it would all be theirs. Now, like I say, there was a very specific name for that, which I've typically forgotten, but they went over there, and they existed exactly as you have described. By our standards, British standards, pretty much in the middle of nowhere, sharing a huge property, which did need renovation, with an elderly lady, and no intention of picking up any French whatsoever. And the idea of a regular Frenchman or woman understanding somebody from Falkirk is unimaginable. So even if
you're
being
very kind, you're being very kind there. Most of us wouldn't understand that.
But if they were to find a French person who spoke English, he probably wouldn't understand them either.
Right.
And the other one is a living and extant example. My great friend, now retired from university, who made his own wine for decades, now retired, again, lives literally in the middle of nowhere, in the Bergerac area, literally in the middle of nowhere. His wife doesn't speak to anybody.
Right.
Won't learn French. Goes into the nearest town, hooks up with Brits, expats, and that's her life.
Well, exactly. And I'll throw in another statistic here, which is a pretty scary one, and that is that the average period of this experimental, this French experiment, as it were, amongst the Brits is 3 years. That's all, and then they give it up and head back. The dream is shattered, and and at least one reason out of the 1 in 3 of the couples that go back, it's for breakup of the marriage.
Yes.
they have found
Yes.
that actually thrust together, so they've got nobody else to talk to except themselves and their cat. They find that they're much closer to the cat, particularly if it's the neighbor's cat. And they
You,
so it,
you sound like you know a lot about my marriage there, Harry.
no, I mean, well, we get into the figures for actual breakup of marriages now, which unfortunately is close to 1 in 2, isn't it? But uh,
Yes, I'm afraid it is.
the sanctity of marriage is the bonds and the sense of responsibility. It's just become almost a casual relationship now. Marriage, it's rather sad. But then again, that's some of us are old-fashioned and we believe in old-fashioned values. But our day is gone. So marriage isn't as sacred as it once was as a relationship. And I'm not
Well,
saying.
I think there's nothing old-fashioned about Christian values. And if you have taken those vows and made those promises, it should take a hell of a lot to even consider breaking them. But as you say, it's become almost a casual thing. And again, we'll go back to our multiculturalism. That hasn't helped.
Mm-hmm.
That we
Well, this
talked
is
about
it.
last time, you and me. That hasn't helped. The fact we're no longer, in fact, a Christian country. We are also far from a religious country. We are secular.
Absolutely, yeah, yeah.
So there is an erosion of even the education of good principles, of good behavior. So no, it is a disappointing situation.
Well, disappointing marriage, of course, is a very, in some ways, it's a very unnatural arrangement. You suddenly you're living in a not a cosmopolitan world, but a multipolar world. You've gone to school, you've had lots of friends, buddies, you've joined rugby clubs, you've done this, done that, traveled, you go down to the bar to meet friends, and then suddenly you go into an isolated relationship with one other person. And it's you retain your friends, but they become second and third importance to your new relationship. And then all the troubles start. You get a home, all the expenses, and babies start to arrive, and you've got to be fed and clothed and educated and sent off to absolutely ridiculous and useless, expensive universities, second-rate, third-rate, fifth-rate universities, and the pressures on that that's an artificial relationship are intense, and the quality of love, which is the cement that binds that together, is put under tremendous stress. So it's quite natural that marriages break down, but it's also equally important that there are rules and regulations and values and moral customs of behavior that oblige you to, or that help you overcome those stresses and strains.
Well, that's the point. That is the point. It is under enormous strain. It is an unnatural relationship. I mean, men particularly are not naturally monogamous.
Nor are women. Nor are women, really.
Many women aren't.
Women, to a large degree, seek comfort, continuity, and assurance much more than men do.
Yes, they're the ones who demand the commitment.
Yes, but they also have a more direct relationship to the evolution of the marriage when children come, and they're much more maternal. You can get very good fathers, but fathers are still somewhat distant to their progeny in comparison to women. Women do all the work. Women take all the responsibility and become much closer to their charge than men do. There used to be a division. The man would sort of paint the toilet door and make sure it worked, and the woman would make sure that the baby got fed and watered and what have you. So there were distinct roles. Then the roles became blurred, but then became shared, and which everybody said was a good thing. You know, that there should be an equal sharing of it. But some of the roles remained extremely in the domain of the woman, and some of them in the man. And some of them became so blurred that you didn't know who was the man and the woman in the relationship.
Well, again, you are demonstrating an extraordinary knowledge of my marriage. In fact, no, my marriage remains unequal because I do everything.
Mm-hmm.
But joking apart, you're absolutely right. Well, it's the creation, the evolution of the house husband, isn't it?
Well, I think there's even a little bit more there. I mean, a marriage is a wonderful opportunity to provide the structure to develop and society, to build the population, to have children, to share, to do all sorts of wonderful things together. But it is a very unnatural relationship, marriage. Men and women are so different. I mean, they make unnatural partners. The bonding, and I'm not talking about sexual bonding here, the bonding that can happen between a couple of guys or a couple of girls.
Sorry, what does sexual mean? I've no idea. What does that mean?
Well, I'm talking about.
Sorry, I'm joking. I'm being flippant. Carry on.
Yeah. I'm not talking about bonding between men in a sexual sense. I'm talking about bonding just because of sheer deep friendship. You can be in love with a woman without being her friend, or vice versa.
Oh yes.
Where it's difficult to have that kind of a relationship with one of your buddies. You either either like the guy or you don't, and there is a chemical difference. I mean, just a bit of a joke here. A chemical difference. Our chemistry is different. We say, well, believe it or not, there are 25 chemicals, the biologists will tell us, in a woman's body that if they were in a man's body would kill him instantly. So, I mean, it hardly proves my point philosophically, but it is a biological fact.
Is that a fact? Is that a biological fact?
That's a biological fact. That if these chemicals were in a man's body, and of course, even some biologists have amused themselves by putting value on these chemicals. And a woman's body, because of the different chemical structure and the current market for those chemicals, is worth about 25 times more than the man's body is. If you wanted to break it down and sell the chemical content.
Why am I not surprised?
There's all sorts of funny things that have happened, but we are different. We're monumentally different, and that's what's important.
It's Mars and Venus, and it's rare that there's an alignment.
Yeah, which of course now takes us into the ultimate trap, and that is, well, we've all got to be equal. Well, how can we be equal? How can you make give equal qualities to totally different, not chemical content, but emotional content?
Yes, I mean,
women think differently. Women think laterally. They can think of several things at once. They're multitaskers. They're very good at that. Men are vertical thinkers. They're very good at doing one job at a time. They want to focus on it, do a hell of a good job, and then move on to the next one. They couldn't possibly.
Yes, that's very true.
Yeah, so we are tremendously different people. So if we judge each other in those terms, it'll be a case of permanent conflict. Marriage to a woman is a very unnatural relationship. It's a beautiful relationship. At the same time, it can produce many advantages, but it's not a natural state of affairs. I
very much take your point. I mean, just on the friendship point, it is said, and I've heard it said by female friends of mine, that the key to a successful marriage is in fact friendship. It's not love, it's not sexual attraction necessarily, because that fades, but it is friendship.
Absolutely.
And you'll hear women say, my husband is my best friend. And that's how
Absolutely.
they view it.
That's wonderful, and you know, of course, what happens in many couples, it simply becomes a question of companionship, a very worrying situation, because when they get old and their life, they're no longer individuals; they're simply both part of the same body and mind, as it were, in the companionship context. And when one of them dies, the other one dies 2 weeks later.
Yes, I know a
Because
number of examples
they've
of
lost
that.
half,
Just
literally lost half of themselves,
yes,
and so, but in relationship, the friendship, and of course it does evolve, as you say, through all the different phases, and there's a tendency of one partner wishing to dominate over the other. There's the tendency through the influences that are imposed on each individual member to for them to grow differently. The man, the breadwinner, supposedly in the old structure, was off to work. He's living in a different world. He's not aware of the pressures that the poor girl is experiencing in the house and stuck in there with the babies all day and never getting out and so on, and feeling the pressures that she feels. And they grow differently. They evolve differently. The It's well-known fact, I think, that young girls evolve more quickly, they mature more quickly than young boys.
oh, absolutely. There's
Young
no doubt about that.
young girls are reach womanhood, I think, or well on the way to it by the time they're 17 or 18, as a rule.
Well,
Where
Harry, with respect, I think you'll find that, and I've certainly read that puberty for girls is getting younger and younger.
Absolutely. And the boys, many boys, they still seem to be like teenagers lost when they're 21, 22,
Well,
um,
and older.
and older, which is why it was a hell of a good thing when we had the military service as a holding tank, as a form of finishing off the character building, the shaping of the male species. That was done away with, and the world has gone to hell in a handbasket ever since. So we evolve at different speeds. Now, after that rapid evolution from childhood into womanhood on the part of the girl, there's then a period of slow evolution. Whereas the man, when he does start to build his career, and he starts to develop in all sorts of ways that nobody ever thought of, and in different directions, and he expands rapidly, and many of us started off a little bit shakily in life, and then finally found what it was that we should be doing. Hopefully, that's one hopes that arrives. Still too many square pegs in round holes, I feel, but you finally find what it is that turns you on, a job that is meaningful to you, that is meaningful to your employer, and you go ahead and you change, you evolve, you assume responsibilities, and you're no longer the same person your wife married, and she is certainly no longer the same girl that you married.
Oh, that's undoubtedly the case.
You've
Yeah.
evolved in different directions, and then the law sticks its, oh, excuse me here, but the law sticks its notion in there and says, well, everybody's equal, which of course they are. And so if something goes wrong, everything gets carved down the middle, which sounds fair. But it gives an awful opportunity for abuse of one side that hasn't contributed adequately, and I'm not taking sides there, to just rip off the other one. There's so many unjust divorce settlements, it's amazing. I'm dealing with a case at the moment. I don't think I'm speaking out of turn here, where a good friend of mine lost his sight recently, and his no names, no pactorals, so it won't hurt anybody. But his wife just said, "Oh, I don't want to be a carer for the rest of my life," and so she ditched him. And poor guy is blind, and we'll have to lead him around by the hand. And she's just taken off with some other guy, and just openly said, "I don't." But now the other guy, they're suing him for most of what he's got, not half, most of what he's got.
So the ex-wife and the new boyfriend
Yeah,
are after your blind friend's property.
absolutely, and a major part of it too. The far more than half. They obviously hope to get half, but they don't deserve. And mind you, most of his property he had acquired, worked for, built his little business. He'd acquired before he was married this second time to this particular lady. So, I
Lady's
mean,
not a word I would use
she'll
for
get
somebody like that, Harry, but
under the
there we are.
justice system, she'll get half, and I think that's scandalous. She shouldn't get a penny.
I couldn't agree with you more. It may be she'll get a third, actually.
Well, there you go. But even a third is scandalous. And the guy that she's taken up with is apparently very wealthy.
Oh, I'm sure.
Yeah.
This is Dickensian. This is
Yeah.
the black side, the dark side of human nature.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's nothing new under the sun. That's a very, very tragic story, I have to say, because I have a very close friend whose wife has stood by him, who has now virtually lost his sight.
Mm-hmm.
And he was a graphic designer, so the loss of his sight has proven utterly destructive.
Mm-hmm.
But thankfully, he had personal and professional insurance, and that is what is keeping them going.
Mm-hmm.
But mercifully, his wife, in a very long marriage, has stayed with him, thankfully.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But it's a terrible thing. In my weirder moments, I often try and imagine what it would be like, particularly without my vision. I mean,
Well, exactly.
I sometimes wake up. Well, I often wake up in the night,
Mm-hmm.
and it's very, not so much this time of year, but when it's very dark, and for a split second, I think I'm blind. I know it sounds ridiculous, but
Mm-hmm.
it's so dark,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
and I can't find anything to fix my vision on. Yeah, daft though it sounds, I find that really scary.
It
Really
is,
scary.
and this, my friend, is quite an amazing person because the stoicism with which he faces this this problem is amazing. And he had a little business, which I won't get into the details because that could almost identify him. But he continues to run his business, and
Some people are just incredible.
just incredible. And he travels, he moves around, he leads a full life. He refuses to does his best to try and even move around without help, to feel independent and still capable of being responsible for himself. I just an amazing person, but he's going to get.
He sounds it.
He's going to get.
They do exist.
He's going to get cleaned out.
They do exist, but I'm sure he finds your friendship a great help, Harry.
Well, there's one or two of us have taken him on board, and genuinely so. Not out of sympathy, because he's a good lad. He's a genuine type of person, a decent man, a generous man, and he deserved better than that, from.
Oh, absolutely.
Which takes us back into the term for better or for worse.
Yes, quite.
In marriage.
Well, in sickness and in health.
The marriage in sickness or in health. The marriage vows, the moral context of marriage seems to have gone out of the window.
For richer, for poorer.
Yeah.
I doubt whether people even understand them these days. The vows.
I can't understand.
My understanding is that a lot of them now choose their own vows. They write their own vows.
Indeed, they do. Yeah.
And certainly the Anglican Church doesn't encourage them, but they don't say no.
Mm-hmm.
The priest will say, okay. In the Catholic Church, because here in Arundel, which is Catholic city, they won't allow that. The Catholics insist on retaining the traditional vows.
Mm-hmm.
But there again, of course, they won't marry certain types of people.
Mm-hmm.
They won't marry homosexuals. They won't marry divorcees, and so on. Where you live, are they religious still, or?
Religion is becoming the domain of the older people.
Yes, quite so.
As the population in the countryside shrinks, because the young people, the kinds of jobs that young people aspire to, are more to be found in the big cities now than
Absolutely.
they are. The way people have left the land. France was an agricultural economy until quite recently, until almost the beginning of the Second World War. In terms of the numbers of people, I'm not talking about generation of economic wealth, but the number of people employed on the land just before the war was about 2,500 to 2.5 million to 3 million, and now it's about 300,000 or 400,000 max.
Yeah.
On the land, and so and young people don't go into farming. Farming has become mechanized, so a farmer and a couple of helpers can run a 500-acre farm with a few machines, where it used to be labor intensive. So you have got the drift of young people in the new professions to go to the big cities, which is leading to what we call in French the désertification de la campagne, which means people leaving the countryside, so the older, which leaves only the older people, and they're the religious. Still retain their religious values, still go to church on Sundays, and almost daily in our little town we have a funeral. The population has shrunk. I've been here 15 years in this particular town. I've been in France over 35 years now. In this particular town, when I came, it was 5,900 people. It's now 3,800 people.
Crops.
Now that's quarter.
Quite a drain.
That's about a quarter, isn't it? Yeah, and in the 15 years, which implies that if I live another 15 years, which I intend to, it's going to be halved. The population is going to be halved. And I can't, and loyalty to my new adopted town, I can't even afford to die. I mean, I'd be impacting negatively on the demographics of my children.
I wonder, as we come towards the end of this discussion, there are two or three things that's sitting on the sidelines that I've listened to. I'd like to just revisit with you. Is you discussing newspapers? A friend of mine who was the editor, one of the editors of a national newspaper, despairs because youngsters coming in now look at stuff off the web without the old I need three separate confirmations of facts. They just simply take what they see on the web as fact. Do you take that into account in your assessment of the newspapers you read?
I think the news that we're fed is as good as the sources. I agree with that. If all information flow is subject to abuse, it's managed. There is very sophisticated ways now of managing the information flow. We're fed a diatribe every day by the politicians who hire high expensive communications consultants to tell us to try and explain what they're doing in the most favorable fashion. And if those communications consultants succeed, it allows the politicians to continue to hoodwink us, again dividing, this division between the governed and the governors and the governed, So you've got to take all information as suspect these days. The amazing false information coming out of Ukraine or Gaza is quite amazing. And once national respected bodies like the BBC totally distorting information through purveying the views, the opinions of their correspondents, as opposed to looking for the hard facts. Gaza is an amazing example. The casualty figures are entirely based on what Hamas says they are. Nobody's actually trying to find out what casualty figures really are.
Yeah.
And so it's
secondly, Harry, in your chat, the two of you about property, it has always seemed to me that the notion that everybody should have a separate house does not fit in with the topography of geography of Britain. We're a very small nation, and for everybody, as the population grows, to have a house, it seems to me to be contradictory. I understand that renting in Germany and France is much more common. Is that true?
It's very true. I'm not sure about the figures for Germany, but I know it's true in France. There's a tremendous rental sector in France. Much aspiration to aspiring to own your own home is much less of a force amongst the French than it is amongst the Brits. And, Englishman's home is his castle kind of theory of. So yeah, I'd say that was true. The rental market is very strong in France, and particularly, of course, in the big cities.
And finally, in your relationship chat between man and woman, it's always struck me in a movie called Shenandoah, I think, about the American Civil War. And a young lieutenant says to sort of a fairly established Southern gentleman, but it doesn't matter, "Sir, I'd like your daughter's hand in marriage." And the man says, "Do you like my daughter?" "Sir," he says, "I love her." "I didn't ask you that. Do you like her?" And do you think that that's an element in a relationship in a man and a woman that's important?
Well, I think it's critically important because if it isn't based on true friendship, it's only based on some sort of vague, emotional, poetic form of love or sexual attraction. It's just going to be a passing phase. So I think to build a lasting relationship, you've got to like somebody. It's got to be somebody that even at that point, at that point, essentially, you've got to want to be with for the rest of your days and to share with. No, I think liking somebody is critically important. I am in a very unusual position. I was married to a woman who I loved and who I still do love, but I never liked. So we've all been through that sort of an experience, I think. So liking is critically important. Like involves all sorts of factors such as comfort, respect, companionship, and so liking. Yeah, I buy that entirely. I love these.
Sorry, Harry.
I love these expressions. When people can come out with vulgar pejoratives, when really a much more powerful use of the English language is to say of somebody, "Oh, he's not a very nice person." That is a ton, weighs a ton. You can use expletives and saying, "I won't use them now." The good people of Lewis wouldn't appreciate that, and nor should they. But to actually just say of somebody they're not a very nice person is absolutely condemning. You don't need to get into hyperbole to express yourself in a forceful manner.
Well,
Philip?
in May of this year, my passing phase will have lasted 36 years.
Yeah.
That's quite a long time for a passing phase, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah.
You know. But there we are.
But we've all been through that, and so anyway, you need all the help you can get for the modern marriage to survive the pressures and threats to its existence. I don't envy young people getting married today in an uncertain world where the values are becoming less clearly defined every day. And certainly, whereas the structure of society, the school, the church, the family, the social groupings, and what have you, have all gone. I mean, the church has disappeared. You've got people now. Gosh, can you mention the incompetence at the head of the Church of England, for instance? I mean, unbelievable. Let's see if we can use the example I've just given. Justin Welby, probably a very nice man, but totally incompetent, as far as I can see.
Yes, I agree.
You don't have to say any nasty things about Justin Welby. One of my dearest friends, who died about 4 years ago, was a lady who was the closest friend of Justin Welby's mother. Now, Archbishop Welby was, I don't know whether people are aware of this, he was born out of wedlock. He was an illegitimate child, a love child. And he was adopted, of course, directly afterwards. And he went on, had a successful career in business and then in the church. My friend who died held the newborn baby in her arms just after he was born. And we often talked about that, and we followed the career of Welby, certainly from the point when he was appointed to his present position. And he could, from all I understand through her, because she kept in touch with the mother and with the family and with, all I know, the Archbishop, and altogether seen as a very nice man, but absolutely unsuited to the role of leadership that he has assumed at a time when the church desperately needs strong, firm, clear indication of support of its values, and when the parishes are decaying, it's one of the saddest stories in modern religious history. The incompetence of this man Justin Welby. Probably a very nice man, as I say, but that's not the solution to the church and to the values, and all of the gone completely woke. I mean, and the last thing you need in a marriage, if we're going back to the question of holding marriages together or religion together, is woke thinking. But anyway, that's I'm allowing my thoughts to flow over a little bit there, but I'm saddened because of the proximity I feel to the man without ever having met him, but knowing his background and knowing how people cared about him, and seeing what's happening to the Anglican Church at the moment, and as part of the fabric of the nation, the parishes, the churches, the poor curates and vicars who are left to defend their dioceses as best they can, whereas these completely useless idiots are talking about giving £1 billion reparation for the slave trade, when it's desperately needed to help maintain religion as one of the pillars, one of the structures of our modern society. I'm expressing myself a little bit too seriously there.
No, we don't mind that, Harry. for the sake of your cough,
Yes.
I'll call it a day there. We've done over an hour. As ever, very stimulating opinions, Mr. Atherton.
Mm.
Are you okay for a week's time?
I'm okay, very well. And I did notice you had a little bit of a problem with your scheduling. You had one lady had to call off, didn't she, or something?
Yeah, that was
Susie, was it?
Susie.
Yeah. Hmm?
That was Susie. That's Keith's carer.
Oh, yes.
And she does a slot with him most Monday mornings, but she was called away. But I do a slot with her if she's available on a Wednesday.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if that's okay, Harry, I'll see you in a week's time.
On Monday. And by the way, just before I forget, what I did see is you sent me that link for this very interesting gentleman. But I haven't had because I've been a little bit off color. I haven't had a chance to watch it right through. But initially, it looks like he's a pretty sharp cookie. This guy, and
Rich, he's a top bloke. I think the thought of you and he hooking up, even for just one program, I would be delighted to watch that.
Well, we can certainly do that. I'll watch it right through. What was he professionally? What did he do? Is it?
Oh God, he's done so much. Educationalist, worked for the UN. He was assistant to the Secretary General. He gives his life story in the program, in the podcast. Extraordinary stories. I won't ruin them for you. From
Okay,
start to finish.
Yeah, well, I watched that show right through, and if we can do something together that'll interest people, I'm game. I think.
I'm in no doubt it would interest people. I'm in no doubt at all. So I'll try and get that arranged, Harry.
Okay. Good show.
Okay, well,
we look forward to seeing you next Monday.
See you next Monday.
And to Keith, well, God bless you both. I've been talking about religion. By the way, I believe in religion, but I'm not necessarily a religious person myself. But however,
no.
But I believe in the importance of societal structures, of which is one, and I mourn its passing.
Yes.
And I mourn its passing through mismanagement. There you go. Okay. But then again,
on that note, I will end the stream and then I'll say goodbye to you both.